وسهلا بكل الذين ينضموا للاستماع إلى راديو بلدي أول راديو عربي أمريكي ويعنى بقضايا العرب في المهجر. برامجنا في راديو بلدي كل يوم جمعة من 8 وحتى 9 صباحا مع ليلى الحسيني في بث حي ومباشر عبر wnzk راديو 690 AM. صباح الخير بلدي، صباح الخير لكل مستمعينا.
Welcome to Radio Baladi, the first Arab, Middle Eastern, and American simulcast radio show. Radio Baladi is broadcast every Friday morning on WNZK 690 AM from 8 until 9 Eastern Time on Good Morning Michigan with Layla Al-Husseini. Our call-in number 248-557-3300. And now, stay tuned for the best radio talk show on Arab and American issues with your host, Layla Al-Husseini.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and wdmv 700 AM.
There's a cool vibe in Detroit these days, the same vibe that's at Marygrove College. We've got great career-oriented degrees that will put you on the path to your future, on campus and online. Why not explore Marygrove? You can start college this spring. Go to marygrove.edu or call 313-927-1240 to get more information. International students pay the same rate as domestic students, and let us empower you.
The upcoming talks between the U.S. President Donald Trump and the visiting Egyptian President Abdel Sisi promise to enhance the American-Egyptian dealings, particularly fighting terrorism. Since the relations between Egypt and the U.S. deteriorated steadily during the former President Barack Obama's tenure, expectations from the people in Egypt for a change in Trump's administration's heralding a new era of U.S.-Egypt ties. Today we are going to discuss the implications of that new relation between Washington and Cairo. In fact, Dr. Gawad is going to be the guest, not the interviewer, because he has been traveling to Cairo, where I am right now. I'm going to be with you today from Cairo, Marwa Macboul. We are going to start the first segment of today's program with Dr. Gawad as an expert on the U.S. Egyptian issues, and we hope to have more guests in the next segment. Dr. Gawad, why do you think people in Egypt were very glad that Trump won the election and not Clinton?
I think the reason is that Mr. Trump, during his campaign, made it clear that he wants to establish a strong alliance with Egyptians and with the government of Egypt, particularly in the field of fighting terrorism. Also, the Egyptians are very fed up with the ongoing terror campaign against regular civilians in Egypt, throughout Egypt, but particularly in Sinai. And they figure that an alliance with America, with Mr. Trump in that field in fighting terrorism will probably benefit the country and rid them once and for all of the threat of terrorism. But also the fact that Mr. Trump mentioned Egypt as a reliable partner in fighting terrorism gave many Egyptians the hope, not just to fight terrorism and get rid of terrorism, but also perhaps to establish a new economic relationship that would benefit the poorer Egyptians.
Why do you think Egypt was not in the first travel ban list of the countries?
Well, the reason actually goes back to two issues. One is that the 7 countries that Mr. Trump selected to ban their nationals from coming into the U.S., that list was actually established beforehand by President Obama. So there wasn't any further work done to that. They just grabbed the list that was already there, and which was done by a previous administration, just used it. But then again, as I just mentioned, that Mr. Trump wants to have an alliance with Egypt, so he cannot have an alliance at the same time include Egypt on top of a list of banned nationals. But the fact of the matter is, not just Egypt, but also other countries that participated, or let me be more cautious and accurate, nationals from those countries participated in the attacks known as the 9/11 attacks. And those countries include Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, and the United Arab Emirates. None of those countries is included on that list. In fact, Saudi Arabia had 15 out of 19 people, terrorists, took part in the 9/11 attacks, and Saudi Arabia obviously is not on that list. Egypt is not. Lebanon is not. UAE is not. So I guess Mr. Trump, by not including Egypt, is signaling his willingness to start a new alliance, not just with Egypt, but I believe also an alliance against terrorism that would include Egypt, Israel, Jordan, and Kuwait.
The relations between Egypt and the U.S. actually got so much deteriorated steadily during the former President Barack Obama. And how would you think this relation would change in Trump's administration?
In fact, time will tell, but I tell you, my own feeling is that it will not really dramatically change. And the reason is that no matter what Mr. Trump wants, the U.S. doesn't work just by the wishes of their president. The U.S. has established institutions, and those institutions, to a large degree, establish also the policies, well-known policies of the U.S. For example, you have the U.S. Congress, and you have the press, you have different other elements in American society that would influence and dictate what relationship the U.S. would have with any other country, not Egypt. But I believe initially, let's hope that in the field of fighting terrorism, the relationship will flourish. Let's hope that somehow, because of that close alliance and fighting terrorism, Egypt will benefit economically somehow. Congress would probably provide more help. There are some senators in the U.S. right now have been calling for a Marshall Plan for Egypt. I don't think that will happen, but at least it is an indication that there is a new trend within the U.S. Congress in favor of Egypt.
Do you think that Trump is fighting terrorism actually, or he is trying to eradicate the fanatic, let's say, fanatic Islam?
Fanatics will never go away, and I'm not talking about Islamic fanatic, I'm talking about fanatics in general. They don't go away, and Islamic terrorists, extremists have existed ever since the death of the Prophet Muhammad, and they keep coming back in different names, under different umbrellas, with different ideologies, but they are there. And we can trace them, from the first days after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. We must also admit that Islamic history is bloody. The 3 or 4 caliphs after the Prophet were murdered. And then there was bloodshed throughout Islamic history. And recently we had Al-Qaeda. We thought Al-Qaeda was gone. Then there was Daesh or ISIS. We think the ISIS will be gone, but something else will come. So I think Mr. Trump is being naive to believe that once and for all that threat will be eradicated. I think it's a much more complicated issue that needs to be dealt with on different levels economically. Providing job opportunities, providing better education, providing better religious education, And so Mr. Trump is in for a long haul, and I hope that he will at least partially succeed. But I'm sorry, I'm afraid terrorism will stay with us.
Since being elected as president, Donald Trump actually made so many controversial orders. Among the orders is an order hasn't been brought into force yet, is the withdrawal from the biggest market, or the deal that is Trans-Pacific Partnership. How do you think that Trump's order, if that ever brought into force, would affect Egypt's economy?
Fortunately for Egypt, all those treaties that Mr. Trump is trying to renegotiate have nothing to do with Egypt per se. They affect the relationships with other countries in Asia, with other countries in Western Hemisphere, Canada, Mexico, and so forth. But generally speaking, I also want to say that Mr. Trump may try to renegotiate certain aspects to regain some jobs lost to American workers, also regain some manufacturing jobs to make sure that American companies stay within the U.S. and not immigrate outside of the U.S. But I must also say that those treaties have been painstakingly negotiated by previous presidents, including Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. And I'm sure they made certain that American would get a good deal out of those deals. But then again, Mr. Trump may be able to improve on them. As far as Egypt goes, Egypt will be slightly affected by any of those changes. But as I said, the economic benefits for Egypt from any improved U.S.-Egyptian relationship must come through looking into a better economic package to the Egyptian people.
Dr. Gawad, do you think that there is anything in common between President Donald Trump and President Sisi?
Yes, I think there is a lot of common grounds or common feature. Both are autocratic leaders, both are strong men. Mr. Trump, of course, unfortunately for him, he works in the U.S. and there are institutions in the U.S., but Mr. Trump's admiration of President Sisi stems from the fact that he admires strongmen, including President Putin of Russia. And if you look at the way Mr. Trump structured his cabinet, you will find at least 3 generals, military generals, working with him in different civilian functions like the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Homeland Security, and his White House National Security Advisor. We've never seen before such a large number of generals, military people working for a U.S. president so closely in the White House. And that's an indication of maybe common ground between the background of Mr. Sisi and how Mr. Trump admires strongmen, military people, generals. And unfortunately, also it is an indication that perhaps at one point in the new U.S.-Egyptian relationship, Congress will have to intervene to preserve some of the traditional values, democratic values, human rights values that the U.S. churches, despite the will of both men in Egypt and in Washington.
And here's another question. How do you see the ties or the relations between Egypt and U.S. would go if Clinton was elected instead?
I think this is a moot question since Mrs. Clinton is no longer on the political field. She lost the election. Yes, she won the popular vote, but the American system doesn't work that way. The U.S. president is elected by the so-called electoral college, not by the popular vote. But I think that had Mrs. Clinton won the election, we would have expected a continuation, of the policies of Barack Obama, because she worked closely with him as Secretary of State. They both belong to the same Democratic Party, similar policies, values. And also B, a continuation of the policies adopted by her husband, former President Bill Clinton, who at one point was very close to resolving the Palestinian-Israeli issue, but unfortunately Yasser Arafat walked out of that final agreement. So Mrs. Clinton would have adopted policies that would fall under perhaps a middle line between what her husband did and what former President Barack Obama did.
But that won't move the relation between the U.S. And Egypt any further in the future, right?
I think that Mr. Trump for sure would be more lenient in pushing Egypt to improve its human rights record, improve personal and civil liberties in Egypt. Mrs. Clinton would have insisted and pushed harder. She actually asked President Sisi when she met him during his presence at the UN in New York, she asked him to release some young people, Egyptian young people, being detained in Cairo right now. Something that Mr. Trump did not touch on, did not mention at all. And that's also part of the reason why Mr. Sisi liked Mr. Trump better than Mrs. Clinton.
And now let's move to a commercial break and be right back for more.
It's never too early to get your child on the right track. From their first words to first grade, Dreamy Children's Center in Troy works closely with parents to provide an experience that goes beyond early education. The highly qualified and experienced staff use a variety of programs that can help nurture important personality traits like responsibility, independence, problem solving, motivation, and respect. They also have educational programs ranging from preschooling for infants, toddlers, transitional toddlers, and pre-K to Montessori-approved programs and bilingual curriculums for young children. They're open from 6 a.m. to 6:30 p.m., can provide breakfast, lunch, and dinner with snacks in between, and can also arrange for after-school pickup. Dreamy Children's Center in Troy is located at 37373 DeQuinder, just above 16 Mile Road, and can be found on Facebook at Dreamy Children's Center. Ask about the free preschool program. Call today, 248-680-9170, 248-680-9170.
When you're looking for the best in optical care, Dr. Imad Nakash is your doctor to see. With years of experience and thousands of successful procedures performed, you can trust your eyes to Dr. Imad Nakash. See Dr. Imad Nakash and his professional staff for your eye care needs. There's 2 locations to serve you. In Hazel Park, call 248-336-3937. 248-336-3937. In Rochester Hills, call 248-299-3937. That's 248-299-3937.
A car accident can change your life in an instant. As a result of a car accident, you may become unemployed. As a result of a car accident, you may need a lot of medical treatment. People think that insurance companies are on their side. Why? Because they're giving them 1 or 2 benefits. Are they giving them all the benefits they deserve? How would one know unless you consult with an attorney? Call the law offices of Jumana Kiruz at 248-557-3645. 248-557-3645.
Ziyad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Donna, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products. because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziad.com. That's www.ziad.com. Ziad, quality products from our family to yours.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and wdmv 700 AM.
Before the break, we discussed with Dr. Gawad a change expected in the U.S.-Egyptian relation under Donald Trump's administration and how the order that he has issued since taking office may have their effect on Egypt, either on the issue of fighting terrorism and having Egypt as an ally in that war against extremism, or on tourism and Egyptian economy. And now let's hear more from Dr. Gawad. And here's one last question. How do you think people would react if President Trump was the president of Egypt with all his controversial orders?
Well, of course, that's a hypothetical question because Mr. Trump will never be president of Egypt. But let's just handle that question for the fun of it. Many Egyptians would be elated, would probably believe that Mr. Trump being the president of Egypt will bring wealth to every single poor Egyptian. The economy will be super. He will probably, they would expect him to spend his own wealth money to improve life in Egypt economically and financially. But on the other hand, I kind of believe that Mr. Trump would have to resign within the first 3 months if he were to become president of Egypt. The difficulties, troubles, problems in Egypt have been building up for the past 60 years at least. It's not just a product of Hosni Mubarak or Anwar Sadat or Mohammed Morsi. It's been building up since 1952, unfortunately, and it will take as long to begin to dissipate.
Now let's turn to a preview of how people here in Egypt read what lies between the lines and how they relate the significance of President Trump's invitation to President Sisi to Washington. And we will start with Dr. Shahira Amin, an independent journalist here in Cairo.
I would confidently say that relations between Egypt and the U.S. under a Trump administration will be warmer, will be friendlier, and particularly fruitful for Egypt. As Mr. Trump has said, there's chemistry between the two men. Trump called Mr. Sisi a fantastic guy when they met in September last year, and that was before the U.S. election. Mr. Sisi too has said that he will make, that Trump would make a great leader for the United States. And I think it's because of two main reasons. Number one, there were tensions between Egypt and the Obama administration, and Hillary Clinton was seen as an extension of that administration. In her meeting with President Sisi late last year, and in fact on every other occasion before that, she brought up human rights, the crackdown on dissent, and even the crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood. And that prompted Egypt to say, you know, hey, stay out of our internal affairs. So definitely Mr. Sisi was very happy to see the back of that administration. And he was the first to congratulate Donald Trump on his election victory. The second reason is that the two men have the war against terror at the top of their agendas.
So I'm expecting Mr. Trump to extend his support to President Sisi in the fight against militants in the Sinai Peninsula. And I also expect relations to go back to what they were early on under President Mubarak and Mr. Sadat, when Egypt was a major U.S. ally in the Middle East. But the U.S. is unlikely to increase its military aid, and that is because it's not up to Mr. Trump alone, but the U.S. Congress as well has to agree, and the U.S. Congress has voiced its concerns on Egypt's security crackdown on dissent. So, you know, Mr. Trump will have to do some persuading here to the people around him. Egypt and the United States will cooperate very closely in fighting ISIS, exchange of intelligence, joint strategies. We saw that Egypt has not spoken out against Mr. Trump's proposed Muslim ban, for instance, and I think it's because Egypt is waiting to hear the United States brand the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization. If it were up to Mr. Trump alone, he would definitely have designated the Muslim Brotherhood a terror group, but that decision isn't up to him alone, and it could have very serious repercussions for the United States, and I think that's what Mr. Trump's advisors are telling him. But we're seeing, you know, much stronger relations since Mr. Trump won the election. There have been exchanges of phone calls, and an invitation has been put forward for Mr. Sisi to visit the United States. Definitely much closer ties and a much, much stronger relationship than the one that Mr. Sisi had with President Obama.
Dr. Shahira has prospect that the relations between the two countries is turning to be warmer and more friendly and also more fruitful for Egypt, especially in fighting terrorism. And now let's move to another guest in our program, Rasha Ibrahim, a freelance journalist at the Nile TV News in Cairo. Rasha, from your own point of view, do you think people in Egypt who are in support for Trump are those who earlier supported Sisi as president to Egypt?
To a big extent. Well, starting from the beginning, the win of Trump in the elections as Egyptians received news of Donald Trump's victory in the U.S. presidential election with mixed reactions ranging from celebration to disappointment and even outright despair. While President Abdel Sisi and his supporters welcomed the news of Trump becoming the 45th President of the United States, Egypt's liberals and pro-democracy activists expressed shock and anguish on social media networks. The widely divergent views on the shocking election outcome reflect an increased polarization in Egypt's society, a society as divided as the American electorate itself. Sisi was among the first world leaders to congratulate Trump on his win. In a presidential statement released on November the 10th, he said, "Egypt hopes Trump's presidency will breathe a new spirit into U.S. Egyptian relations." Sisi had met the two U.S. presidential hopefuls in New York in September and later said he had no doubt that Trump would make a stronger leader, while Hillary Clinton had raised the issue of human rights and called for the respect of rule of law during her meeting with Sisi. Okay, Trump had decided to look the other way. Instead, he told Sisi he looked forward to visiting Egypt, and later he called that Egyptian president a fantastic guy. Trump has in campaign speeches also advocated for torturing terrorists and called for the targeting for their families.
So why do you think they are in support for Trump? What are their expectations, actually?
Well, the majority of Sisi's supporters are also celebrating Trump's election victory. Relieved to see Clinton, whom they believe supported the Muslim Brotherhood rise to power, lose the race. Many of them have said on Twitter that they see Trump as the lesser of two evils. In contrast, Egypt's liberals and pro-democracy activists had expressed disappointment at the outcome of the U.S. election. In an apparent backlash against Sisi and his supporters for their support of Trump, former Vice President Mohammed al-Baradei, who served on an interim basis for 1 month after the 3rd of July 2013, overthrow of Islamist President Mohammed Morsi, urged them to fully grasp the statements of Trump and his allies on Islam and Muslims. In the message on his Twitter account, he further exhorted them to have some self-dignity. Many see that Trump administration would witness a change in the U.S. policy in the Middle East, but they don't know what kind of change would bring. They believe it would mark a new beginning and improvement in the U.S. Egyptian relations and enhance fighting extremism and terrorism. Others may see Trump as a successful entrepreneur who has done well for himself and anticipating that he will do well for the future of the two-country ties. But many ordinary people in Egypt, engrossed in their daily lives amid rising inflation and soaring prices of basic commodities, seem to care little about what happened next in the U.S. Egyptian relation. They think that no matter who is in the White House, the U.S. policies towards Egypt and the Middle East will remain unchanged.
Are there any common ground between Trump and President Sisi that would make them work together for a better future for the relation that bind the two countries?
In fact, the two men share similar views, and there is common ground between Trump and Egypt's strongman. The two men also share similar views on a number of issues, including their stance on the Muslim Brotherhood, which is designated a terrorist group by Egypt and described by Trump as radical in a foreign policy speech he gave in New York in June. Sisi backed the Russian draft resolution that stopped short of calling for a halt to the devastating bombing of Aleppo, a move that promoted Saudi Arabia to suspend its oil aid to Egypt over the last 2 months. Similarly, Trump had said in his campaign speeches that backing the rebels in Syria was a mistake, and the U.S. will be better off supporting Assad as a hedge against Islamic radicalism. And while Sisi has pursued warmer ties with Russia, Trump has too expressed willingness to cooperate with Putin, even if it involved a difficult path. Both Sisi and Trump have expressed oppositions to the Iran deal brokered in July 2015 between the Islamic Republic and the P5+1 group. Trump has called the deal, which puts limits on Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief, a disaster, and has vowed to rip it up.
Maybe that's right. Most people here in Egypt believe that the U.S. policies towards Egypt and the Middle East in general will remain unchanged no matter who is in the White House. And now let's proceed with more views from Egypt about the expectations of the U.S. Egyptian ties. Next is our guest, Dr. Sanaa Roushdi, professor at the Faculty of Law at the Egyptian University.
For the Middle East, it really, it's sometimes difficult to talk about the entire region as one block, but, there is a lot of hope that Trump will have a stronger hand towards funding of terrorism and terrorist organizations, and this part of the world is really tired with the strife and the problems with Daesh, ISIS, and various other terrorist organizations. In the case of Egypt specifically, if you could say that this country had a chosen candidate, it was Trump anyway. There's a strong feeling here that this will improve relations with Egypt, and that Trump would be a supporter of the current government and regime, and that Hillary and the previous administration have been strong supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they're hoping that this will end with the presidency of Trump.
And now let's move to a commercial break, and we'll be right back for more.
There's a cool vibe in Detroit these days, the same vibe that's at Marygrove College. We've got great career-oriented degrees that will put you on a path to your future. On campus and online, why not explore Marygrove? You could start college this spring. Go to marygrove.edu or call 313-927-1240 to get more information. International students pay the same rate as domestic students, and let us empower you.
Life for Relief and Development is a nonprofit charity that has been providing humanitarian aid and development to people and communities regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background for over 22 years. When disaster occurs here or around the world, Life rushes to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. Life also has development projects to provide medical relief, water purification, educational programs, relief for orphans, and much more. Your help and support can greatly improve these efforts. All donations are tax deductible. For more information, please visit our website at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493. That's lifeusa.org, 248-424-7493.
Are you going to start a restaurant or grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Naji Abood at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Naji Abood now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New Concept Products and Design, new location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Naji Abood, 734-744-9796.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and wdmv 700 AM.
Before the break, almost all views raise hope on eradicating terrorism in Egypt, especially in Sinai Peninsula, in collaboration with Trump's tenure. And here comes another view from an independent journalist based in Cairo, Mohie Ismail.
The Trump administration will provide new opportunities and challenges on issues such as Islamic extremism, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and the status of Jerusalem. Despite Trump's controversial statement on Muslim immigration to U.S., he is surprisingly popular in Egypt. I think mainly due to unpopularity of Obama and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Clinton is seen in Egypt as a key player in Obama's administration that was too quick to abandon former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, a long-time U.S. ally. When protests broke out against him in early 2011, many Egyptians view Obama administration as having been, we can say, too harsh in responding to the Egyptian military removal of Brotherhood and subsequent crackdown A response that included withholding some U.S. military aid, such as Apache helicopters, at time that an insurgency was raging at full flame in Sinai. Much of the perception on Trump's reputation in Egypt has been shaped by anti-Trump American media, but Clinton and Obama have far worse reputation in Arab country. I think in general, it seems that Sisi thinks he can do business with Trump, who as a pragmatic leader would dwell much less on annoying issues such as democracy, freedom, human rights, and I think he will focus more on a down-to-earth stuff.
Since coming to power in June 2014, Sisi has waged a crackdown on Islamic extremism in Egypt, especially targeting the Muslim Brotherhood as well as Islamic State-affiliated terror groups in Sinai Peninsula. Sisi, in a televised speech, called for reforms within the Islamic religion to counter fanaticism and extremism. Ahmed Al-Gawad has more to say in this regard.
As for the significance, it first confirms what many have been speculating and what Egypt has also been wishing for, that under the Trump administration, the bilateral relations between both the states and Egypt would recover. It has been harshly damaged after the 2013 ousting of Islamist President Mohamed Morsi that brought President Abdel Sisi, then defense minister, to power. The relations with the U.S. administration under Barack Obama has been tensed, with the U.S. freezing its annual military aid to Egypt for some time, and trying to put pressure on the internal politics as Egyptians have been, the Egyptian experts have been viewing it. So this confirms that Trump is taking a different approach than Obama, particularly toward Egypt, and that terrorism is the main focus for the cooperation, particularly to help Egypt deal with what it has with militant insurgency in the Sinai. Definitely the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a cornerstone in the regional crisis in the Middle East. Many have been focusing on what's going on in Libya, Syria, Yemen, Iraq and other countries, but Egypt has been trying to push, along with Arab countries lately, that the cornerstone for all these crises, the main conflict that, if resolved, would definitely tune down the violence in the Middle East, is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. To have a two-state solution, to give Palestinians their own lands with complete sovereignty, and finally approach or have the dream that millions have been looking forward to in decades. So it has been, or it is a cornerstone in that, but definitely Egypt will be putting that as a priority in the agenda when the two leaders meet.
People here in Egypt are waiting to see how Trump will act inside the White House before jumping to conclusions. At the end of the program, I would like to thank my guest, Dr. Atef Abdel Gawad from America, and Dr. Shahira Amin, Dr. Sanaa Roushdi, Rasha Ibrahim, Mohie Ismail, and Ahmed Al-Gawad from Cairo. That was Marwa Macboul reporting from Cairo.
وسهلا بكل الذين ينضموا للاستماع إلى راديو بلدي أول راديو عربي أمريكي ويعنى بقضايا العرب في المهجر. برامجنا في راديو بلدي كل يوم جمعة من 8 وحتى 9 صباحا مع ليلى الحسيني في بث حي ومباشر عبر wnzk راديو 690 AM. صباح الخير بلدي، صباح الخير لكل مستمعينا.
Welcome to Radio Baladi, the first Arab, Middle Eastern, and American simulcast radio show. Radio Baladi is broadcast every Friday morning on wnzk 690 AM from 8 until 9 Eastern Time on Good Morning Michigan with Layla Al-Husseini. Our call-in number 248-557-3300. And now, stay tuned for the best radio talk show on Arab and American issues with your host, Layla Al-Husseini.